Okay, take two, because my mic was muted the first time. Hello, Dr. Ramsing. I am going to try and teach you at least the basics of Magic the Gathering today. Nothing too complicated, just generally how you would go through a turn and what the different types of cards there are and lands and the various colors and things like that. I will also try and submit another video along with this one where I talk about I'll be using a different piece of software as well because all of my Magic cards are at a different house that I can't get to because of quarantine right now. But anyways, uh, this is just a digital software that me and my friends use to play some formats and stuff like that. Anyways, I will also be using a different software to try and walk someone through a turn. As that, I'll try and use that, I guess, as my my leading a group through a video, I suppose, or through an activity, I guess. But anyways, I'll go ahead and start. So the first thing you need to know about Magic is that there are 5 colors. There's blue, red, white, black, and green, and they all have different kinds of color identities, and they do all different. They all do different sorts of things, and they all play off of each other in different kinds of ways, and they all have certain things. Some of them can do, and certain things some of them can do, and some of them shouldn't do, and they all constantly break and make their own rules as the game evolves. It's one of my favorite parts of Magic or whatever. But the 5 color wheel is how the game is really built around. There's for each of those colors, there's a type of mana: green, blue, as I just said, green, blue, white, red, and black. And to get those mana, you need to play lands, such as this forest here that I've just dragged that onto the field. Whenever you play a forest, you can only play 1 land a turn, unless you have some other thing that will let you play more. But whenever you tap a land, it's considered that you are creating 1 green mana, and you can use that to spend. Excuse me. You can, spend that mana to cast any kind of spells. And to go over spell costs right now, this Chasm Skulker, it costs a total of 3 mana. There's this 2 colorless mana here, which is no color. There's just 2, and then a blue icon as well. So that means it just needs any 2 mana and any color combination, whether it's colorless, red, blue, white, anything, and then it needs at least 1 blue mana. So you would also call this a blue card because it has a blue mana cost restriction. And that's the gist of how the game works. You play lands, you tap lands to play other cards, or so on and so forth until one of you is dead. That's how the game works. Just to go over the different kinds of cards, there are currently, there's lands, obviously, as I just pointed out. There's a forest, plains, mountain. There's forests for green mana, plains for white mana, mountains for red mana, swamps for black mana, and islands for blue mana. And those all produce those kinds of different things. But then the next basic card that you need to know about is this creature card. These are what most decks are going to be built around, is your creatures, or at least most of them will be anyways. Is they have a name, a cost, and then they'll select creature, and then their creature type. This one is a squid horror. Their rules text, which is different for every different card usually, or they might not have any, and they'll just have flavor text. And then they have a power and a toughness. So a power is how much damage they will deal in combat, and a toughness is how much damage they can take in combat. When we get to that phase later, and that'll probably be in my other video where I talked about different parts of a turn and how to go through that, and I'll just because I don't think I could do that on this software very easily. Anyways, creatures are what you're mainly going to try and win the game with. They can hit your opponent, or they can hit your opponent's creatures when they block with them. They'll deal damage to your opponents. Every player starts with 20 health. When that drops to 0, you've won the game, as long as it's your opponent's health, not somebody else's. The next card type is an artifact. These kind of cards usually don't cost any kind of colored mana. Usually, they're usually colorless. You can pay for them with any color mana, and they usually either sit around. You can usually either activate them to get some kind of bonus effect, or like enchantments, like the Smothering Tithe, they'll sit around and they'll just have some kind of lingering effect that will affect the game as long as it's out there, or whenever a certain condition is met, something will happen. That's usually what enchantments and artifacts do. The next kind of card is a Planeswalker, which is kind of like the two mixed together. They have loyalty counters. You spend or add loyalty counters to do their certain different effects. It's kind of the same thing, except they're a lot more powerful usually. And then the last two, these are what we would all call your permanents. These stay on the battlefield after resolving, which is where they go to the stack, which would, in this case, it would be over here on this, which is where whenever I play a card, it would go onto the stack, and then you, in response, could play something that would allow you to be played at response at instant speed, or so they call it, which I'll get to that in just a second. It would go on top of the stack, and then it would resolve, as in like we would read the first card on top and figure out what it had to do going downward until the stack was empty, basically. But anyways, these are all called permanents. These are cards that after you play them, after they resolve, they stay on the board. They don't go to your graveyard, which would be this thing over here. They don't go to exile, anything like that. Which your exile is just like your super graveyard. So the next non-permanent card type is an instant. This is what I was talking about at instant speed. Instants can be played at any time as long as you can pay the cost, whether it's not your turn, whether it's at a point in your turn where you usually shouldn't be able to play a card. Instant speeds can be played whenever, and they're usually small little effects. They're after they've resolved, they usually go to the graveyard, as in like they're done and they don't go back to your hand. They don't stay on the battlefield or anything like that. And the last kind of card is a sorcery. These are things that can only be played whenever you could play any other kind of card that isn't an instant. They can only be played during your main phase or during your second main phase, usually, unless the card specifically states otherwise. But those are your different card types, but also sorceries also don't stay on the battlefield usually after they've resolved, which as long as something's on the battlefield, it's considered in play, as it's considered doing something constantly. Which your graveyard is where spells go when they resolve that don't stay on the battlefield. It's where creatures go. Whenever anything is removed from the battlefield, it usually goes to the graveyard or to the exile, which is just really, you don't need to know about a whole lot difference between those two for first playthroughs, but graveyard usually is able to be interacted with, exile usually is not. To next go on to how like a normal turn would work, you would start your untap step. You would start with your untap step. So like how I said earlier, like you tap a card or to generate mana, you're not allowed to untap it unless another card would allow you to, or it's your next turn and everything untaps then. That's how you are able to play a new cards every round and something like that. Next is your upkeep step. It's pretty self-explanatory. If there's anything that needs to be done that isn't untapping or drawing a card, it's usually done during the upkeep step. It's just where you get all your little ducks in a row. Anything that might get really complicated is usually in here. And then you would draw a single card on your turn unless you have things that would draw you more. So like I drew Vivid Grove, which is a land. And these three all happen very quickly in this quick succession. Usually you won't have an upkeep unless it's like you're playing a deck that has a lot of upkeep things. You usually won't have very many things there. You'll go untap, upkeep, draw, and then you'll go into your main phase, which is the first part of your turn where you can really start playing cards. This is where you'll play your land for the turn, and then you'll start tapping and upping lands to play other cards and do things like that. Next is combat, where there's 3 stages of that, where you'll the first stage of combat is attackers, so it's my turn, let's say, if I'm the one who's drawn and the one who's untapped this turn, it's my turn. So I would declare any creatures I have, such as this Chasm Skulker here, I would declare it as an attacker. I would tap it, meaning that it's now tapped, and I creatures have different rules for tapping and untapping. So I tap it, and when I declare it's being an attacker, meaning that I intend to do damage to my opponent with it. And then it goes to the blockers phase, where your opponent then will, any of their untapped creatures, because tapped creatures can't block, will then attempt to block your creature that you are attempting to attack with. Um, and then we'll go to our damage phase, which is where we just assign number values on how combat worked out. Your power to their toughness, their power to your toughness, that kind of thing. Any power that they manage to get through goes to your life. When that runs to 0, that's empty. And then we go on to your second main phase, which is just like your first main phase, except it's just later on in the turn. There's whole kinds of strategy that revolve around when you play your cards and when you don't. And then after your second main phase is your end phase, which is where it's basically just, there might be a couple things that happen on your end phase, but mostly it just means your turn is over. As far as that goes, that's pretty much how you play Magic. Now, while I try and figure out how to stop the Zoom recording.